Athens is not quiet. It is watching. In the narrow streets where stone absorbs heat and rumor travels faster than footsteps, a single household becomes the center of attention. Not a palace, not a council hall, a private home. Inside, voices rise and fall in careful rhythm, not the language of law, but of persuasion, of argument, of ideas that do not always stay within the room they are spoken in. And somewhere in that house sits a woman the city is beginning to define through contradiction. To some, she is an intellectual force. To others, a danger without formal place in the city. And to many, she is still a question. Aspasia. She does not hold power, she shapes the people who do. We step back into Athens in the 430s BCE, a city under strain. War with Sparta has begun reshaping alliances, trust is thinning, and political pressure is rising inside the city rooms. Even daily life feels increasingly political, and in times like this, Athens often turns inward. It looks for pressure points, for symbols, for figures around whom uncertainty can gather. Aspasia arrives in Athens from Miletus, a Greek city in Asia Minor, and is identified as a metic, a non-citizen foreign resident. This status carried no political rights in Athens, yet did not prevent access to elite intellectual spaces. What becomes visible in later accounts is her association with Pericles, one of Athens' most influential statesmen. Their connection is consistently noted in ancient traditions, though its exact personal and intellectual dimensions are interpreted differently across sources. Inside her household, described as a center of elite discussion, conversations take place among members of Athens' intellectual and political circles. These gatherings reflect a broader Athenian culture of symposium-like environments, where rhetoric, philosophy, and debate were central forms of social power. What mattered here was speech, how to persuade, how to construct an argument that survives outside the room, how language becomes influence in a city built on public debate. In this environment, Aspasia is portrayed in multiple traditions as deeply skilled in rhetoric and discussion. Her influence is contested, but consistently acknowledged in ancient commentary. Sources that reference her include Plato, through philosophical dialogues that position her as rhetorically significant; Aristophanes, who uses her image in satirical and politically charged contexts; and later writers who reapparate her role through historical distance. Even Socrates is, in some traditions, associated with learning rhetorical ideas from her, though this is likely shaped by philosophical framing rather than direct historical record. Outside this intellectual circle, Athens is under strain. The war is worsening, and political anxiety is rising. In such moments, attention often shifts toward perceived centers of influence. Whispers begin to circulate, not formal accusations at first, but questions about proximity to power, about influence, about loyalty, and about the position of a metic woman within elite political networks. She operated in spaces where she had no formal right to be, and that made her both influential and vulnerable. Inside the household, daily life likely continued in the rhythm of discussion and exchange, shaped by the expectations of elite Athenian culture. But over time, later traditions suggest a tightening atmosphere, not as a verified detail, but as a reflection of how political pressure reshapes public narratives. Some sources portray Aspasia as a teacher or facilitator of rhetoric within Pericles' circle, reinforcing the idea of intellectual influence operating outside formal structures. Others, particularly satirical accounts, reshape her image into a political symbol used in broader attacks. At the center of these shifting portrayals is Pericles, a dominant political figure whose authority depended on persuasion in public assemblies and private counsel alike. And that creates a structural vulnerability in interpretation. If influence exists in private spaces, it can also be questioned publicly, and once questioned, it becomes politically useful. At some point, Aspasia becomes associated in later accounts with accusations involving impiety and moral impropriety. But these charges are widely understood by historians as politically motivated, closely tied to indirect attacks on Pericles himself during periods of political tension. The evidence does not present a single stable legal narrative. Instead, it reflects competing traditions, some suggesting a formal trial, others implying a politically charged episode that may not have fully developed into structured proceedings. What remains consistent is not the legal outcome, but the function of the accusation. It is a challenge to legitimacy, a challenge to influence, a challenge to the idea that proximity to power, without citizenship, silence will send to something up, a challenge to state attention. Pericles is said in some accounts to have defended her publicly, though the details vary and cannot be confirmed with certainty. Some traditions describe resolution in her favor. Others leave the outcome unresolved. Aspasia's final years are not preserved in a definitive form. What remains is a fragmented figure, shaped by philosophical dialogue, political satire, and later historical reinterpretation. She appears in Plato's philosophical framing, in Aristophanes' comedic satire, and in later writers attempting to reconstruct her significance. These are not neutral sources. They are interpretations, sometimes admiring, sometimes hostile, always shaped by perspective. But together, they preserve something consistent, the tension surrounding how influence is recognized at all. Because Aspasia's story sets inside a broader historical question. When power is exercised through conversation, proximity, and persuasion, it often leaves fewer traces than formal authority. And so the question remains: if influence does not require a title, then how do we recognize it when it happens? She does not hold power. She shapes the people who do. If this story moved you, there are more like it on this channel. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. England does not always fall in battles. Sometimes, it unravels in silence. A shoreline at night. No royal procession, no trumpets, no formal declaration of arrival. Only wind over water, salt in the air, and a ship cutting through darkness toward a kingdom that is no longer certain who it serves. On that ship is a queen, and she is not returning in the way she once left. She is coming back into a situation already breaking apart. But history is clear on one thing: she did not return to a collapsing system. She helped bring it down and reshape what came after. In 1326, England is not a stable unity. It is a fractured court shaped by loyalty, resentment, and exhaustion. At the center of that fracture sits Edward II's regime, increasingly defined by the dominance of royal favorites, especially the Despencer family. Their control over patronage, land, and access to the king generated widespread noble resentment, and this resentment becomes one of the key drivers of open rebellion. And into this unstable system returns Isabella of France, Queen of England by marriage, and a figure who would soon move far beyond ceremonial influence. What follows is not a passive return into chaos. It is a coordinated political and military intervention that reshapes the English crown itself. Rewind a few years. Inside Edward II's court, power is not balanced, it is concentrated. The Despencer's dominance at court causes escalating conflict across the nobility. as access to the king and royal resources becomes increasingly controlled by a narrow faction. Isabella, as queen consort, is formally part of this system, but she does not control it. Over time, her position becomes politically constrained, as factional loyalty replaces stable governance. Eventually, she leaves for France. Officially, this is framed as diplomacy, but politically, it becomes separation from the English power structure. France becomes not just refuge, but the base from which she begins rebuilding influence. In France, Isabella remains queen in title, but she is now outside England's governing system. This is where her role changes fundamentally. She forms a political and military alliance with Roger Mortimer. While later chroniclers debate personal dynamics, what is historically clear is this: Mortimer becomes her key operational partner in organizing an invasion and overthrow of Edward II's regime. Together, they begin assembling opposition. This is not spontaneous unrest. It is structured, political preparation. Support is coordinated across English nobles abroad and internal factions disillusioned with Edward II's government. Communication networks form quietly across borders, and alliances are tested and secured over time. By this stage, royal authority still exists formally in England, but functionally, it is weakening under internal fragmentation. September 1326. The English coast comes into view. Later chroniclers frame this as symbolic reversal, exile becoming return, and return becoming conquest. But the historical reality is more direct. Isabella led an invasion of England in 1326 with support from Roger Mortimer. The force she brought was not massive by medieval standards, but it did not need to be. Because England was already unstable, timing mattered more than size. When Isabella lands, resistance is not immediate. Instead, there is hesitation. Edward II remains king in law, but not in full political control. The Despencer-aligned faction represents one power center. Isabella's returning force represents another. Between them, nobles hesitate, calculating survival rather than declaring loyalty. Over weeks, alignment shifts. Some defect, some withdraw, some reposition quietly. This is not a battlefield collapse. It is political reallocation of power in real time. As Isabella advances, kingship itself becomes unstable. The crown is no longer a fixed authority, it is something that depends on recognition. Edward II's regime weakens not through a single defeat, but through repeated withdrawals of support from key political actors. Power does not fall cleanly. It stops being collectively upheld. The Despencer faction becomes the primary target of opposition. Their removal from power marks a decisive turning point in the collapse of Edward II's governing structure. Their fall triggers rapid redistribution of authority across the nobility. Edward II is left politically isolated with shrinking institutional support. Edward II is captured and removed from effective political control. This is one of the rarest outcomes in English monarchical history. In 1327, Edward II was formally deposed. The act was not symbolic, it was the structural removal of a reigning king. Shortly afterward, Edward II died under circumstances that remain historically unclear and widely debated, often described as suspicious in contemporary accounts. Meanwhile, Edward III becomes the focal point of legitimacy, not as a ruler yet, but as the necessary continuity of monarchy. Following deposition, Isabella and Roger Mortimer assume governing authority as regents for the young Edward III. This is not symbolic influence. It is real governing power control over royal administration, political appointments, and state decision-making. For a brief period, they effectively function as the center of English government. However, the structure they build is politically fragile. Mortimer's influence grows disproportionately within the regime, and his accumulation of authority begins to alienate sections of the nobility as well as members of the royal household. By 1330, Edward III moves to assert direct control over the crown. Mortimer is arrested and executed, marking the end of their joint administration. Isabella is not executed or imprisoned. Instead, she is removed from political influence and gradually withdrawn from state affairs. She lives the remainder of her life in relative comfort and security, but outside any governing role. She remains a royal figure, respected in status, but politically sidelined permanently. History does not speak with one voice about Isabella of France. Some view her as a calculated political strategist operating inside a fractured monarchy. Others interpret her through later moral frameworks shaped by different eras. But what remains structurally clear is this: she did not inherit power. She actively constructed it in a system not designed for her to rule. She was a queen operating outside traditional female political roles of medieval England, exercising military and strategic leadership through alliance building, timing, and political coordination rather than formal authority. And in doing so, she demonstrates something broader about political systems under strain. Because in unstable systems, strategic rebellion becomes possible when authority is already weakened and fragmented. Alliances can outweigh formal legitimacy when institutions lose cohesion. And timing can matter more than force. Edward II's deposition remains one of the rare moments where a reigning English monarch was removed from power. Isabella did not simply witness that collapse. She helped produce it and shaped what came after. Because sometimes in history, power is not inherited. It is constructed in the space where systems stop holding themselves together. If this story moved you, there are more like it on this channel. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. A letter is reportedly being passed around Paris. Not quietly, but deliberately. Copied, shared, possibly read aloud in rooms where Christine is not present. It calls her naive, presumptuous, unqualified. A woman, attempting to judge literature. At her desk, candlelight flickering across parchment, Christine de Pizan reads the words again. Not quickly, not emotionally, carefully, because she begins to understand something in this moment. This may no longer be just about a book. It begins to feel like something larger, about whether voices like hers are meant to be heard at all. Paris, early 1400s. The city hums with scholars, clerics, and courtiers. Manuscripts pass from hand to hand, copied with care, debated with intensity. Books are not just stories here. They function as authority. And one of the most influential texts circulating at the time is Roman de la Rose, a sprawling allegorical poem, widely admired, but also controversial. Within its verses are passages that portray women as manipulative, deceptive, morally weak. Many accept it, some defend it, but one voice, unexpected and not universally welcomed, begins to challenge it. Christine. To understand how she arrived here, we step backward. Before the letters, before the controversy, back to a different version of her life. She was not born into obscurity. Her father reportedly served at the French court, often described as a physician and astrologer to the king. This likely gave her something rare for a woman at the time. Access, books, education, conversation. She grows up surrounded by ideas, absorbing language, literature, philosophy, not as an outsider, but from within the system. Then, stability. She marries. By many accounts, the marriage appears to have been supportive, perhaps even unusually so for the period. For a moment, her life follows a predictable path. Until it doesn't. Her husband dies suddenly. Sources suggest illness, though details are not entirely consistent. And with his death, everything shifts. Income disappears. Legal disputes may have emerged. Responsibility remains. She is now a widow, likely still young, with dependents to support. And in that world, options are limited. There is no dramatic announcement, no audience, no applause, just a desk, paper, and a decision that, for many at the time, might have seemed unthinkable. She appears to begin writing, professionally, not as a pastime, not as private reflection, but as work, as income, as survival. This matters, because while women did write, becoming a professional author, earning a living through writing, was extremely rare. Slowly, something begins to change. Her poems circulate. Patrons take notice, particularly within noble circles, including connections to the French court. She appears to have secured patronage, at least in part through these networks. She writes with precision, clarity, and an understanding of courtly expectations. Her work is copied into illuminated manuscripts, carefully decorated pages that elevate text into something almost ceremonial. These are not just writings. They are objects associated with status and influence. And Christine is learning how to move within that system. But respect does not equal acceptance, especially not for long. Then comes the debate. Roman de la Rose. Christine reads it, and instead of quietly accepting its authority, she does something different. She responds, not with outrage, not with dismissal, but with argument. Structured, written, public. She questions its portrayal of women. She challenges its assumptions. She critiques its influence. And importantly, she does this in the same intellectual language used by the men who defend it. Letters are exchanged. Some of these exchanges survive, though accounts differ in tone and interpretation. What's clear is this: her involvement is not universally welcomed. Some responses dismiss her outright. Others engage her, but often with an undertone of condescension. The message, implicit or explicit: this is not your place. Now the stakes begin to shift. This is no longer just literary critique. It becomes a question of authority. Can a woman interpret literature? Can she critique it? Can she participate in intellectual discourse at all? Christine appears to understand the risk, because if she is discredited, her income could disappear, her independence could collapse, her voice could be diminished. So she adjusts her approach, not by retreating, but by evolving. She begins a new work, not a rebuttal, not exactly, something more expansive. The Book of the City of Ladies. In it, she constructs an entire city, not physically, symbolically, a place where women are defended, not dismissed, where history, myth, and moral argument come together. Inside this city, she gathers stories of notable women, figures drawn from history, religion, and tradition. Some accounts are well documented. Others may reflect interpretations or commonly told narratives of her time. But that distinction is part of the design. She is not just listing facts. She can be understood as reshaping narrative. This is critical, because instead of arguing point by point against her critics, she reframes the discussion itself. If literature has been used to diminish women, she uses literature to symbolically rebuild their image. Stone by stone, story by story. Christine de Pizan did not lead armies. She did not seize power. She did not overthrow institutions. What she did was quieter, but in some ways, just as demanding. She stayed. She worked. She wrote. And she carved out space where there was very little, not through force, but through persistence, structure, and control. Her story leaves us with something more practical than inspiration, something usable. That influence does not always come from confrontation. Sometimes, it comes from reframing the story itself, from building independence where dependence was expected, from answering criticism not with noise, but with clarity. And perhaps that is why her voice lasted. Because in a world that questioned whether she should speak at all, she did more than speak. She made her arguments increasingly difficult to ignore. Her story leaves us with something more practical than inspiration, something usable. 3 lessons. First, influence does not always come from confrontation. Sometimes, it comes from reframing the story itself. Second, independence is not given. It is built, often under pressure. And third, in a world that questions your right to speak, clarity matters more than volume. If this story moved you, subscribe. There are more voices like hers buried, forgotten, waiting. We'll find them together. If this story moved you, there are more like it on this channel. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. The gunboat doesn't make a sound. It cuts through the black water of the Combahee River like a blade through silk. No lanterns, no voices, nothing, but the low hum of the engine and the breathing of armed men pressed shoulder to shoulder in the dark. It's June 1863, deep in Confederate South Carolina, and standing at the bow of this vessel, scanning the tree line for movement, is a woman who is not supposed to be alive. She has a bounty on her head large enough to buy a house. She hasn't slept in 2 days. Somewhere behind her eyes, a cracked piece of skull presses against her brain, a wound from childhood that drops her into blackouts without warning. And yet, she is the one the United States military is relying on tonight. Because she drew the maps. She built the spy network. She knows which channels are mined, which plantations are guarded, and which ones are not. Her name is Harriet Tubman, and in the next few hours, she will help lead the largest liberation operation of her life. But to understand what happens on this river, you have to understand what made her. Dorchester County, Maryland, the 1820s. A little girl named Araminta Ross, she'll later take her mother's name. Harriet is born into a world where her body is not her own. She is hired out to neighboring farms before she can read, whipped for small infractions, and made to wade through freezing marsh water to check muskrat traps while still a child. The Eastern Shore is beautiful. For her, it is a prison without walls. Then comes the moment that changes everything and nearly kills her. She is barely a teenager when an overseer hurls a 2-pound iron weight at another enslaved person. It misses its target. It strikes Harriet in the skull. The bone fractures. She collapses. For days, she drifts between consciousness and something else, fevered, bleeding, left on a wooden bench with no medical care because her body is worth more as a future laborer than as a patient. She survives. But the wound never fully heals. For the rest of her life, she will experience sudden collapses, tremors, and vivid episodes she describes as visions from God. They terrify those around her. For Harriet, they become a compass, a voice in the dark telling her which way to go. And in 1849, she goes. She runs alone, north through Maryland's swamps and forests, following the stars, sleeping in ditches, moving only at night. She leaves behind her parents, her brothers, her husband, a free black man named John Tubman, who told her she was foolish to try. She crosses into Pennsylvania and stands on free soil for the first time in her life. But freedom, for Harriet, is not a destination, it's an assignment. Within months, she turns around and goes back. Then again, and again. Over the next decade, she will make approximately 13 rescue missions into slave-holding states, guiding roughly 70 people to freedom along the Underground Railroad, that fragile, invisible network of safe houses, root cellars, church basements, and sympathetic strangers connected by trust and terror. She moves in darkness. Lantern signals flash from farmhouse windows. 1 light means safe, 2 means danger. Some popular but unproven stories say quilts hung on clotheslines carry stitched patterns that mark direction, and Harriet sings spirituals. Hymns whose lyrics carry coded instructions wade in the water, means leave the trail and move through the stream to throw off the dogs. The music is beautiful, it is also operational. She carries a pistol, not for slave catchers, though she would use it, but for anyone in her group who panics and wants to turn back. Turning back means interrogation. Interrogation means everyone dies. The gun is persuasion. No one she leads is ever captured. No one ever turns back. They start calling her Moses. And the slaveholders start raising the price on her head. The Union Army needs intelligence in South Carolina's Low Country, and they need someone who understands the land, the language, and the fear of enslaved people who have never seen a Northern soldier. Harriet becomes a scout, a spy, and a nurse. She interviews escaped slaves, maps Confederate positions, identifies torpedo placements in the rivers, and builds a network of informants across the region. By June of 1863, she has what she needs. Colonel James Montgomery commands the gunboats. But the operation, its routes, its timing, its targets, belongs to her. 3 steamers push upriver under a moonless sky. They pass the first torpedo fields using channels Harriet's intelligence has cleared. Then, the signal fires begin planted along the banks to alert enslaved families that the boats have come. And then, chaos. Hundreds of people pour from the plantations. Men, women, children barefoot, carrying bundles, carrying babies, running through mud and gunfire toward the riverbank. Confederate soldiers scramble to respond, but the raid is too fast, too precise. Harriet watches from the deck as boats fill beyond capacity, as hands reach up from the water, as mothers lift children overhead to be pulled aboard. Over 700 people are liberated in a single night. Harriet Tubman has just proven herself the raid's key leader and strategist in one of the war's most extraordinary operations. And she did it on the same soil where people who looked like her were still being sold. Harriet Tubman dies on the 10th of March, 1913. She is buried with military honors at Fort Hill Cemetery. She is approximately 90 years old, though no one is certain of her exact birth date because the system she was born into did not consider that detail worth recording. She freed hundreds. She fought in a war. She outlived the Confederacy by nearly 50 years. And she did it all while carrying a fractured skull, a pistol, and an unshakable belief that the voice in her head was telling the truth. Some people are remembered because of what they achieved. Harriet Tubman is remembered because of what she refused to accept that any human being could own another, that fear was a reason to stop, and that freedom was something you waited for instead of something you went and got. Her life leaves 3 lessons. Leadership is responsibility. True leaders don't escape alone. They go back for others. Courage is built through action. Fear doesn't disappear. You move forward despite it. Trust is everything. People will follow you through the dark, only if they believe you know the way. The river was dark that night, but she knew the way. She always knew the way. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe because history has more voices like hers, and we're just getting started. In Alexandria, silence is never just silence. It is a warning. A carriage moves slowly through a crowded street, cutting through dust, voices, and heat rising off stone. People step aside without protest, but not without attention. In a city already shaped by tension, even ordinary movement carries meaning. Inside sits a woman in simple philosophical robes, calm, composed, carrying nothing visible except scrolls and instruments of thought. She is not alarmed, not because the world is safe, but because she has always lived in the language of ideas, not fear. She does not know it yet. But in a city where intellectual authority and political power are becoming inseparable, her presence already has consequences. She was not neutral in impact. Her authority placed her inside the conflict, whether she chose it or not. And neutrality, real or perceived, does not always remain neutral. Alexandria is not a single unified city in this period. It is layered politically, religiously, intellectually. Roman administrative structures still govern civic order. Christian institutions are rapidly expanding their influence. Traditional philosophical schools continue to operate, but now within an increasingly contested environment. At the center of this intellectual landscape stands Hypatia. She teaches openly, in structured academic settings, as a leading figure of mathematics, philosophy, and astronomy. Her students are not outsiders. They are members of the elite administrators, civic officials, and future political actors. Among them is Orestes, the Roman prefect of Egypt, who is also associated with her intellectual circle and regarded in historical sources as a student and supporter. Her teaching draws on established scholarly traditions. She works within and expands the intellectual lineage of thinkers such as Diophantus in mathematics and Ptolemy in astronomy, engaging deeply with their methods and commentary traditions. This is not isolated scholarship. It is the continuation of a living intellectual system. Her classroom becomes a place where mathematics is refined, astronomy is interpreted, and philosophy is structured into method. But more importantly, it becomes a space where elite decision-makers are shaped intellectually before they shape the city politically. Outside her lecture halls, Alexandria is becoming increasingly polarized. The central tension is political and religious power, specifically between Cyril, the Bishop of Alexandria, and Orestes, the Roman prefect. These are not abstract disagreements. They are competing structures of authority over the city itself. Hypatia is not a political leader, but her association with Orestes places her within the perception of that conflict. In a city where influence is deeply networked, intellectual proximity becomes political meaning. Her visibility in elite circles makes her impossible to ignore. Her role is not hidden. It is public. And in such an environment, public intellectual authority is inseparable from interpretation. Even when she is teaching mathematics or philosophy, her presence is read through a political lens by those outside her classroom. Inside her school, life continues with structure and discipline. Students arrive. Scrolls are opened. Ideas are tested. The focus remains intellectual. Geometry, astronomy, philosophical reasoning. Her work is grounded in clarity, training minds to think systematically in a world growing increasingly fragmented. But outside those walls, interpretation intensifies. She is seen moving through the city in carriages or public routes as part of her normal life. Yet in a polarized environment, even routine visibility gains symbolic meaning, depending on who observes it. Rumors begin to circulate, not formal charges, not legal accusations, but interpretations. That she influences political decisions, that she stands too close to power, that her intellectual authority carries civic weight. None of this replaces her actual work. But perception does not require accuracy to have consequences. And in Alexandria, perception is beginning to outweigh intent. By 415 CE, the conflict between Cyril and Orestes has escalated into open factional hostility within the city. Street-level violence is reported in historical accounts, and civic order becomes unstable. Hypatia continues teaching, not as provocation, not as defiance, but as continuity of her role. However, in a fractured environment, continuity itself becomes interpretable. Her association with Orestes places her at the center of suspicion from opposing factions aligned with Cyril. One day, she is intercepted while traveling through the city in her carriage. a Christian mob, aligned with the political, religious, factional conflict of the period, forcibly removes her. She is killed. Her death is not an isolated act. It occurs within the broader collapse of civic stability and factional violence in Alexandria. What is certain is not ambiguity of outcome, but the political environment in which it occurred. Hypatia's story is often remembered as an ending, but it is also a transition point. A moment where intellectual authority, political power, and social identity became visibly entangled. Her life demonstrates something precise. Knowledge does not exist separately from the societies that contain it. It exists through instruction, continuity, and transmission. And when societies fracture, intellectual authority becomes exposed not because knowledge changes, but because its context does. She does not seek power. Her knowledge places her at its center. Her leadership is not defined by command or office. It is defined by instruction, by clarity, by teaching others how to think in uncertain conditions. Her influence comes through students and ideas, through structured thought passed from mind to mind. Visibility creates both power and risk. Neutrality can be interpreted politically, and leadership through knowledge can outlive the individual who teaches it. In the end, Hypatia does not survive her city, but her intellectual legacy does not end with her life. It continues wherever ideas are preserved, studied, and transmitted. And that is not resolution, it is continuity. If this story moved you, there are more like it on this channel. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. She doesn't hear the courtroom at first, only the chains, metal scraping stone, slow, deliberate, like time itself is being dragged toward an ending she cannot stop. Somewhere beyond these walls, in Rouen, men in heavy robes are deciding what she is allowed to be remembered as: a saint or a lie, a messenger, or a dangerous girl who stepped too close to power. Inside the cell, there is no crown, no army, no banner, just a body they have finally managed to corner, and a question they want answered before sunrise. Not about truth, about surrender, because in a few hours, they will ask her to do something more powerful than confessing a crime. They will ask her to erase herself, to say the voices were never real. That street Michael never spoke. That street Catherine was only silence. That street Margaret never guided her steps. That everything she built was nothing at all. But for her, those voices were real in experience and direction. And politically, they were dangerous because people believed she believed them. And in that moment, history is no longer about what she did. It becomes about whether she will deny that she ever was. Domremy, France. Long before Rouen, long before chains, there is only wind moving through fields, and a small chapel where a girl kneels longer than expected. She is unnoticed in the way most children are in small villages. Not recorded, not tracked, not historically important yet, but inside her life, something refuses to stay quiet. She speaks of things no one else hears, not as imagination, not as metaphor, but as instruction she experiences as real, a presence that names itself. Street Michael, Street Catherine, Street Margaret, voices that do not ask for permission, only action. And while the world around her is built on land, lineage, and law, she begins orienting herself around something invisible, something absolute to her experience, something that does not compromise. Years pass, and France fractures under war. Kings are uncertain, armies exhausted, entire regions suspended in waiting. Then she leaves home. No ceremony, no approval, no protection, only direction. She crosses hostile territory with persistence that doesn't match her position in society. Eventually, she reaches Chinon. The royal court is not ready for her, so they test her. They hide the Dauphin among nobles, blending him into a crowded hall, a controlled deception. If she is nothing, she should fail here. She walks in, stops, and according to accounts, she's said to have recognized the Dauphin without hesitation, not scanning, not guessing, not searching, just acting as if certainty was already established. The room doesn't react immediately. It absorbs the moment first, then breaks into uncertainty, because something unaccounted for just happened. Either she saw through deception, or she created a level of confidence others couldn't immediately dismiss. Either way, they begin listening. They give her armor, not because she holds formal rank, not because she commands armies alone, but because she has become a focal point others rally around. White metal shaped for someone outside traditional structure. A peasant girl carrying a symbol of war she did not design but is now visibly attached to. She does not function as a sole commander. Instead, she drives morale, direction, and momentum in key moments, especially during uncertainty. At Orléans, soldiers expect collapse. They are trained for retreat more than belief. But she moves differently, not controlling everything, but pushing clarity into chaos. Where commanders hesitate, momentum shifts. Where uncertainty dominates, morale tightens. The siege begins to fracture not only physically, but psychologically, because armies don't only break from force, they break from expectation, and expectation starts shifting. Reims Cathedral. Stone rising into silence. Light breaking through stained glass like history is watching itself unfold. A king stands before the altar, but the truth is simpler than ceremony. He is there because a path encouraged and insisted upon by her was followed through political uncertainty. Joan stands nearby, not crowned, not institutionalized, not protected by structure, just present, a force that helped carry fragile legitimacy through instability. The crown is placed, the kingdom is declared, and for a moment, history holds its breath. But power does not stabilize easily. It reacts, it reorganizes, it resists. Compiègne, a gate opens, not into victory, but into collapse. A retreat becomes disorder, and in that disorder, she is captured. Not defeated ideologically, but removed physically. And from here, everything changes. Rouen, cold stone, heavy air. A courtroom controlled under English influence, structured through a church trial designed to delegitimize her and indirectly weaken Charles VII's claim to legitimacy. This is not neutral justice. It is political process dressed as theology. Every question is shaped like a blade, not to discover truth, but to dismantle authority built around her. They do not ask what she experienced. They ask what gives her the right to interpret it. No rank, no institutional backing, no approved authority structure, only conviction. And conviction, in this room, is treated as destabilizing. Day after day, pressure builds. Exhaustion becomes strategy. Confusion becomes leverage. Doubt is introduced systematically. At one point, she signs an abjuration, a controlled renunciation of her claims, likely made under pressure and exhaustion. But it does not hold. She later reaffirms her identity and actions, reversing the submission. And that reversal becomes decisive, because now the system has what it needs. Not just dissent, but relapse. The square in Rouen fills, wood stacked, smoke waiting, like a conclusion already written. She is led forward, and now she is formally condemned for heresy, specifically as a relapsed heretic after recantation. White garments placed on her body, not as honor, but as symbolic inversion of purity, turned into spectacle. She is bound to the stake, not just to end a life, but to end an idea that legitimacy can emerge outside permission structures. The fire is lit, and witnesses expect collapse, confession, fear, breakdown. But instead, they see something unresolved. Not surrender, not reversal, not submission. The body is consumed. But the question remains intact. Authorities assume execution resolves instability. But stories do not require permission to spread. Over time, her narrative persists separate from the court that condemned her, and eventually, the system revisits the case. In 1456, her trial is officially overturned, declared unjust and politically compromised. Centuries later, in 1920, she is canonized, not because history changes her, but because time reclassifies what she represented. Joan of Arc was never meant to operate inside the system she entered. No formal training, no institutional rank, no permission structure validating her role. And yet she moved through political and military spaces as a force others chose to align with, not through command alone, but through clarity that shaped action around her. She did not lead in the traditional sense of full control. She influenced direction, morale, and momentum in moments where certainty was collapsing. Leadership can emerge without permission. Conviction can mobilize people under uncertainty. Visibility creates both influence and risk. And in unstable environments, belief can become a coordinating force. Long after the fire in Rouen faded, the question remained: what if authority was never only granted from above? What if, in moments of collapse, it is also created by those who act with enough conviction that others choose to follow? She is not a miracle, she is a force of conviction that others chose to follow. If this story moved you, there are more like it on this channel. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Paris doesn't sleep in 1793. It waits. In narrow streets, soaked with ink, fear moves faster than horses. Posters appear overnight. Names written, crossed out, condemned. Whispers travel through bakeries, salons, prisons, as if the city itself has learned to accuse. And inside a small confinement room, one woman sits with paper and ink still within reach. Olympe de Gouges, a self-educated playwright and political writer, active in the intellectual and revolutionary circles of Paris. She wrote deliberately, publicly, and politically, knowing that words could shape power. Outside her door, footsteps stop, keys turn. Somewhere in the city, another pamphlet associated with her ideas is being read like evidence, not of thought, but of treason. Let's go back. Montauban, 1748, a provincial French town, far from the intellectual intensity of Paris. A girl is born into a society where expectations are defined long before she can define herself. Olympe de Gouges is self-educated. She develops early as a writer, later becoming a playwright and a politically engaged voice in Parisian intellectual life. Unlike many women of her era, she does not remain confined to private life or indirect influence. She builds authorship as a form of participation. And she does something decisive. She moves to Paris. Paris before the Revolution is a city of salons and performance. In candlelit rooms, writers debate philosophy. Playwrights test ideas through characters. Reputation is currency, and language is power. Olympe enters this world not as royalty, not as institution, but as an independent writer. She begins with theatre, then essays, then political writing. Because around her, France is shifting. The old order is cracking. And cracks, as she understood them, were not collapse. They were openings where ideas could intervene in power. When the revolution begins in the late 1780s, She does not observe it from distance. She enters it directly. At first, the revolution speaks in the language of liberty, but liberty is not evenly applied. In 1791, Olympe de Gouges publishes her most important political work, the Declaration of the Rights of Women and of the Female Citizen. It is a direct response to the 1789 Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Her art Women is structure. If universal rights exclude women, then universality becomes contradiction rather than principle. It is political intervention. It circulates widely, debated in salons, and criticized in political circles. And it establishes her clearly as a voice challenging the revolution's internal inconsistencies. She is not outside the revolution. She is confronting it from within. At the same time, the revolution fractures. Jacobins and Girondins compete for power. Political alignment becomes unstable. Olympe positions herself closer to Girondin ideas, more moderate, constitutional, and critical of escalating violence, while openly opposing Jacobin extremism. This position matters, because in revolutionary systems, neutrality is not neutral, and absence of faction means absence of protection. By 1793, the revolution has hardened. What began as political transformation has become a system of surveillance and accusation, often referred to as the Reign of Terror. Political identity is increasingly defined through loyalty tests, and written material becomes evidence of intent. Olympe de Gouges' writings are scrutinized. She is associated, sometimes directly, sometimes through interpretation, with Girondin sympathies and opposition to Jacobin methods. She is arrested for her writings and her political positions. Her pamphlets are treated not as discourse, but as political agitation within a state defining internal enemies. Inside confinement, the world marrows, but writing does not disappear. Ink remains possible. Paper remains possible. Some accounts suggest she continued writing during detention, though the full extent is not fully preserved. Outside, her name circulates again, not as author, but as accusation. Ideas that once circulated as arguments are now reinterpreted as evidence. The revolution does not debate her writing, it evaluates it as political threat. The Revolutionary Tribunal is not designed for literary interpretation. It is designed for judgment under political crisis. She is accused of counter-revolutionary writing and political agitation. Her work is presented as evidence against her. Her arguments, originally framed as expansions of rights and critiques of inconsistency, are reinterpreted within a system prioritizing stability over plurality of ideas. She is not judged in isolation. She is judged through the logic of a state defining survival through ideological control. In November 17, 1793, during the height of the Reign of Terror, Olympe de Gouges is executed by guillotine. Public executions in revolutionary Paris function as both punishment and political communication. The machine is visible. The message is deliberate. The spectacle is part of governance. Her death becomes part of a broader pattern of repression, targeting dissenting voices across political factions and intellectual circles. In the immediate aftermath, her writings are diminished in dominant revolutionary narratives. But they do not disappear. They persist in fragments, pamphlets, and later rediscoveries. And over time, especially in the 19th and 20th centuries, she is reinterpreted as an early feminist political thinker and a significant voice in the history of rights discourse. Olympe de Gouges did not simply write during a revolution. She intervened in it. She wrote deliberately, publicly, and politically, knowing that words could shape power. Her story reveals something essential about moments of instability. When institutions fracture, interpretation becomes power. She is not a victim of the revolution, she is one of its most direct challengers. And in such environments, ideas are never neutral. They are read through fear, loyalty, and survival. Leadership through ideas, not position. Naming contradictions, power. Visibility is both risk and influence. Ideas can outlive suppression. She is not a victim of the revolution. She is one of its most direct challengers. If this story moved you, there are more like it on this channel. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.